The mind's potential lies beyond the realm of thought.
All right, welcome to the Being Now podcast. In episode 2, we'll be diving into how to set ourselves up for success. We're going to be reflecting on this past week, seeing what opportunities we may have missed, opportunities we recognized and seized, and how we are actively developing through this process. So, Sean, if you want to go ahead and kick it off and kind of share with me and anyone listening how you've been able to set yourself up this week, some of the things that you've done, some of the fruits that you've received from doing so.
So there's no better way than for me to just jump into the ways that I kind of had to structure myself to be able to do this, right? I started noticing that I wasn't really presenting my thoughts well about success, and that turned into its whole thing. And what I had to do was develop a system to organize the way that I think. And through doing that, I kind of realized that that was a fundamental thing that I haven't been doing in the past. And what it is now is what it looks like is I have basically a open note system where I enter brain dumps, I absorb information, and then I come back to the note and I just dump it into whatever page I'm working out of. And then I come back later and I see that what I have is a bunch of little fragments of a complete thought. And so what I'll do is kind of reflect on those things and refine them into what would be a complete thought in a spoken form. So basically, if I can say it with my voice, then I can understand it from someone else's point of view enough that I can consider it a complete thought. But when it comes to actually setting myself up for success, what I focused on was goals. And the reason for that is I thought, what do successful people do? And the conclusion that I came to was that successful people accomplish goals. And out of that, I thought, how do we know that people are goal oriented? And what I discovered was a bunch of different ways that people go about achieving goals. But what I was more focused on was kind of on a more fundamental level, and it's more about what your goal should be and how you go about creating a goal. And what I came to was, the way that we go about our goals, or at least myself in the past, a lot of times I'll think to myself, what am I missing that would make this moment better? Like I feel, a certain way, and I would like to feel better. And what I then do, or have done in the past, is try to take like a snapshot of myself that represents my current state and compare it to what I think would be a better state. And I look at the two of those and I just look at what's not there. And so I try to make up for that with a goal. Mm-hmm. And that quickly falls apart when you try to explain it to somebody, because it's pretty obvious that you don't, and maybe it's not obvious, I don't know. And these are some of the things that I've been dealing with about how this kind of comes up in my life, because I started thinking about my current state and what goals I should actually set for myself with these things in mind. And I came up with like a general way to go about it, and I'll just kind of present that and then see what you think about that, I guess.
Yeah, sure.
So, yeah. And so what I came up with was your goal should set a high aim, but be able to be broken into smaller goals. It should make the next step in your goal difficult enough that it pushes you past where you are, but manageable enough it yields a high probability of success. So, what do you think about that, Chris?
Yeah, you know that I have a strong background in physical fitness, and that's what I did for years. And one thing that I did was I set this really high goal, but what I didn't do was set those little smaller milestones along the way. So like the goal I wanted to achieve was about 5 years out, right? I had a
Yeah,
very specific physique in mind that was inspired by seeing other people on Instagram, TikTok, and I was comparing myself to these people and where I'm at now. And so when I had this big grand picture in my head of where I wanted to be, I knew that would take a long time. And because I didn't set those milestones for myself, these little ones to keep me motivated and keep me going, I actually started to regress and I jumped in head first and it bit me in the ass because I didn't make those little milestones to, like I said, keep me motivated. I think it's really important to have a high aim and then have those little milestones for you to accomplish. So that way you don't get burnt out and you're not looking 5 years down the road. Like anyone can look 5 years down the road and be like, okay, you know what? Maybe this isn't worth it. I got better things to do. But with those little milestones, this goal is a week away. This goal is a month away. This one's, you know, 4 months away. And those are a little bit easier to achieve while keeping the intention set still on that higher goal. So I definitely agree with what you're saying on that.
I really like that you put it that way because it seems what happens is you see those things and you might be able to recognize, this is what I want for myself. But when it comes down to actually pursuing it, kind of what you were talking about, what happens is, you may recognize that you're making progress, but even if you realize you're so far away from it, it just, we talked last week about overcoming negative thoughts,
Hmm.
and everything you said just kind of seemed like it tied in so well with that. Like maybe one of the ways of overcoming negative thoughts is to have a system like this in place that would in turn, kind of stop them from a percentage of them maybe from even entering in the first place. Because
Hmm.
what happens is you see that progress, but then you think, yeah, well, and that right there is, if you can break it down into a goal that is very attainable no matter how far out it is, but you can like segment that thing down into something that you can do every day. I think that would be a really great way to set a goal because you can go out and achieve that every single day. And that's why I started off with saying that successful people accomplish goals, right? This is a way to be successful today.
Right. Yeah, I definitely agree. Again, tying back into the gym thing, if say there's a person that wants to lose 200 pounds and every day they're checking the scale, they're losing maybe half a pound to 1 pound. 200 pounds seems like it's very far away and you get discouraged, you get in your head about it and you're just like, you know what? I just don't want to do this anymore. And you start to make these excuses for yourself. But it's way more beneficial to set yourself up with that higher goal, like you said, and then take it by a day at a time or a week at a time. Like, okay, today I want to lose 1 pound, or this week I want to lose 10 pounds. And then the whole thing that ties it together is just being consistent.
Yes. So to that to that what you were speaking of, I kind of ended up diving into that as well, and it's exactly like you said. So what I kind of came up with, and tell me what you think about this, is you know you think to yourself, what should be the motivator behind my goals, and it's almost like you need the goal and then you need a goal to achieve that goal. And what I mean by that is you have this thing that you want to do. Let's call it life. Let's say that you want to live life the absolute best way that you can, and that's your goal, right?
Mhm.
And all of the things that make up the best thing that you can is personal to everybody. So we don't need to dive into that. But my kind of approach on it is, what can you do every single day that would give you success by accomplishing that goal and ultimately achieve that goal in the bigger sense. And
Mhm.
I came across something in psychology about this, about how our brain rewards our body. Okay. And what happens is, it's not accomplishing the goal that gives us feelings of satisfaction or feelings of accomplishment. Certainly, there is something to be said about having accomplished a goal, but there is something entirely different going on when you can see that you're getting close to that goal based on where you were before you started moving towards that goal. And so I kind of have this idea about, like, maybe there's a goal, and then maybe like the ultimate version of that is something that you would never actually achieve. It would get you as close as possible to achieving that goal, but propel you forward indefinitely, so that you're always like in that space of achieving the goal, so you get to actually feel accomplished in having reached it every day, but in a bigger sense, like you're still always working towards it. And if you
Mhm.
take that approach for your ultimate goal, I just something, I sat down and started organizing myself and taking this uh brain dump into a note system approach, and that's just kind of what I came up with. So yeah.
Yeah, one thing I definitely want to kind of add to that is, especially with spirituality, there's always so much to learn. You're never going to stop learning, but every day as you practice it, you always feel more and more accomplished. And I mean, there are some days where you feel like you didn't really make any progress, or you feel like you may have regressed a little bit, but that's all still part of the process. And so I definitely, yeah, I agree with that. Like having something where you're constantly working at, you're feeling achieved, but it's going to be a lifelong journey. And that's what I feel like spirituality is. You're never going to get to that perfect state. So, what are some of the benefits you've had from doing what you've been doing this past week?
Well, it's been just as confusing as it has been helpful. I'm going to be honest, because this is new to me, right? Um, I'm such a person that goes off of what my mind tells me, that I like something happens and then I feel I need to react, right? And that's not happening anymore. And I'm starting to see that I'm not doubting myself anymore. And that is confusing to my ego, because I can't leave things alone. You know what I mean? Like, I need to, I need to, whatever this is, I need to try to make this better. And I think what's going on is I don't feel the need to do that anymore. Um, my, my goals are, very, very clear. And you were talking about, um, how you might not achieve it that day, right? But in the long term, you still kind of. And what I got from that was uh, the term course correction, right? So you have like this general direction that you're heading in towards that goal, and when you take a moment to reflect, you can notice that you're veering off in another direction, and so you just kind of reposition yourself. You don't have to necessarily go back to where you were. You just have to reposition yourself and go more towards that goal. And I feel like that's what I've been doing and what I've gotten out of this, and I'm very thankful for that.
That's awesome, man. I love to hear that. I definitely, just with talking to you in between the this past week, I've definitely seen that growth that you've been able to make from when we kind of started this week, setting that intention of setting ourselves up for success. and then to where we're at now, I definitely can see kind of the shift you've been able to make, and I've seen a lot of progress with that, and I think it's really amazing.
I'm really, I can't express how grateful I am to hear you say that. It's one thing to be able to sit here and think that I'm doing these things, but I've had several people, including you, express to me how they've seen this kind of happening to or for or whatever. They see that whatever that is starting to, I'm starting to fire closer to being on all cylinders, and that is very, I'm very grateful to hear that. But if it's okay, I'd like to kind of shift away from that now, and I guess maybe ask you, because I didn't really cover this part of it, right? There's a whole thing within this that kind of becomes, well, how do you know what you need for yourself, right?
Hmm.
And I could sit here and ramble about it, but I kind of get the feeling you that's the approach you might have taken.
Yeah, in a sense. I can go ahead and kind of tell you what I did this past week and some of the
Yeah.
fruits I've been able, yeah, and then we can go from there. So, um, once we set the intention from last week's episode, setting ourselves up for success, I had to take a minute and really think about what is success? What does success mean to me specifically? And to me, what success is living a life with peace and harmony. And so I had to figure out what I was going to do to align myself with that this upcoming week, and to really be mindful of all the opportunities I will have. And then, coming into this podcast today now, taking some time to reflect to see the opportunities I may have missed. So, with the intention of having peace and harmony in my life, some of the things that I did in this week was I did a lot of research. And with that research, it was taking me out of the present moment. And I was trying to dissect way too many things. And the conclusion I kind of came to was just allowing the universe to do what it will and teach me what it will when the time is right. So I did start to read into some things and get some good insight. But instead of trying to dissect it, I just left it at what it was and just kind of let that basically like marinate a little bit in my brain. So that way, when those opportunities came, I was able to be more present for them and recognize them as they were happening, if that makes sense. So, we
Yeah,
talked about this
absolutely.
a little bit too with Taoism. And for anyone listening, I have my background basically in religion is I probably align most with Taoism, even though I do study Buddhism, Zen Buddhism, Hinduism, all sorts of religions. I think Taoism is the one I align with most. And one of the core principles in Taoism is called Wu Wei, and that is to do nothing, take no
Well,
action. And so when you hear that, it's kind of conflicting almost, right? You're just like, well, isn't that counterproductive to succeeding? Don't you have to set goals to uh, be successful in whatever you're doing? And then to bring in that aspect of Wu Wei, just do nothing, seems counterproductive. So I had to kind of dive into what Wu Wei really meant. And so the conclusion that I came to was a lot of times when I would be interacting with someone or any sort of external stimuli, I would have an immediate reaction to it. And this is just habitual tendencies that I've, taught myself or have been taught to me over the last 23 years. So it's just deeply ingrained in me. And now being very aware of those things, I'm able to stop them as they're happening. So what I mean by that is with Wu Wei, with do nothing. So, for example, I talked to my manager the other day at work, and he said some things that I really didn't agree with, but it's besides the point. And I immediately got defensive. Now, I didn't speak on it or say it out loud, but I felt that defensiveness kind of arise in me, and I felt myself getting a little bit triggered about what he was saying. And so initially, I would want to say something about it, right? Like that's just the habit that I built. And so by practicing Wu Wei and doing nothing, I was actually able to just take in what he had said and then sit with that, let my initial reaction pass, again, doing nothing. And then once my initial reaction had passed, I was able to process what he had said in a much more clear-headed mindset. And then I was able to proceed with the right kind of action, right? And instead of getting upset and getting mad, I was able to kind of take that step back, come back and talk to him after I had pushed my emotions to the side. And then we had a really good conversation. And I was able to see where he was coming from as a manager. I was able to see that he's not just a manager, he's a person, and he's just also doing what he's told to do. And I respect that. And if I would have just went off my initial instinct, and that would be to immediately tell him I think he's wrong and to go kick rocks, that probably wouldn't have ended well, and I would have set myself up for failure at that point. So that was kind of the big experience I had this week. And I definitely think that keeping that in mind and doing nothing doesn't actually mean, just doing absolutely nothing, but doing nothing when the time is right. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I like that. You know, I have a interpretation of it myself, and it's something very similar, but it's you know the I'm definitely not somebody that has studied
Taoism.
Somebody that has studied Taoism in depthly. It's still new to me,
Mhm.
but what I'm kind of pulling out of that is a sense of, the overall goal for Taoism is to be in the flow. And the way that I do that is by you know I think we have to go back a second and put this in perspective for myself, because
Mhm.
this is about how do I react without acting, right?
Mhm.
And I feel like that's what I got out of what you were saying. And the Wu Wei part of it for me is to do nothing, but there's a space in there, like and maybe it's just the way that I read it, and maybe I need to go back and check it out, but it comes to me as do no thing. And
Mhm.
to really like pull my ego out of the interactions I have with just the way I process information and the way I interact with people is I find that I'm more able to be honest and authentic in my response when I do that. And I watched a video of a like psychological like approach about being authentic. And what I got out of that was that your body will literally stop you from lying. Like it won't actually keep you from being able to tell a lie, but the way that people are like human lie detectors is people that know this, right? And so what I experienced was that I would, maybe get a little jittery. I would, maybe if I was searching too hard for the answer that should come natural, right?
Mhm.
Because there's like a natural way that I should just respond. And um, that natural way is when I'm not putting myself into that situation. And when I'm able to do that effectively, it seems like I'm sitting there and I'm running on all cylinders. And I I really appreciate your take on the, you know this whole this whole thing that we're doing here by, talking about setting ourselves up for success is in effect like pulling us out of the moment, because we have to take the time to think about our approach to what success means to us, how
Hmm.
we how we're going to go forward and achieve that success. And that's not something that is really natural. It's and that's kind of the thing I struggled with so much this week, was trying to remain in that space while doing that. And I kind of just had to drop it for a second and just accept that, if I'm really going to be able to address my needs, like socially, and um, not just socially, but also in, like what I need as a person, right? Because like Taoism to me doesn't necessarily include, the work week, like I haven't found the place in it where it tells me how to deal with, my boss if he comes at me sideways,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so, there's a right way to do that, and so you definitely outline that. But what I'm starting to see is that if I take the time to do these, organize myself properly and orient myself in the right direction, then all of those things seem to fade away.
Hmm.
And if I have goals that provide for me, like if the only thing I have to do is do my daily goal, and that's the only like direct thing I need to do, then I'm able to just flow with everything else. And that's kind of what I started to pull out of this. And I'm not entirely sure how that's going to work tomorrow, but I know that it worked today and it seemed to work yesterday. And the approach that I have is, if I feel like it's not working, then I'll just kind of realign myself in that direction and just let the, car drive itself.
Yeah, for sure. And another thing that I guess I would add is like when we set these goals a lot of the times and we're, really passionate about it, we're really excited, we create this like tunnel vision, right? And then we're just way too like it's almost like obsessive. And I've definitely caught myself doing that sometimes. I like get obsessive over something and then I just like stay up all night just reading and just trying to, like I said earlier, just dissect everything. But yeah, I think I know I touched on this earlier too. Taking yourself or giving yourself a minute to step back and clear your mind and let that your intuition kind of help guide you is what I
Mm,
found to help me be a lot more successful. Like some of the most profound breakthroughs in everything that I've experienced was in a place of no thought, where I was just like driving down the road in my car on my way home from work, just listening to some good music and just enjoying my space that I just created for myself and just enjoying being alive. And then out of nowhere, just boom, that thought pops in and it just connects all those little pieces. And it was that little piece you were missing and it finally fits in. And it's weird how that kind of happens when you just stop for a minute. And that's another part that like ties into Wu Wei, just sometimes no action is the best action you can do.
absolutely. And I started being able to think about myself and how I got to this point without all the extra baggage I've pulled into it from when I come to moments of clarity in the past. And kind of the thing that stuck out was I felt a need to make one thing the thing, right? Like goals. Okay. So I caught myself realizing that, I might be obsessing about how to set the perfect goal, right? And and even in my explanation, maybe I alluded to that in a way. Because, you know, I look at a goal and I think, how can I make this perfect? And it's one thing to maybe have that thought, but um, when you're having that thought, you're not being present and having the experience of being in the moment. And so I have to, like you said, take a moment and reflect and be able to that space that you're in when you're in the car and the revelation just kind of comes to you, there's something to that, right? Um, I think it speaks on this on Taoism as a whole. Like when you're not actively thinking about something that's a problem in your life, it just kind of comes to you. And
Mhm.
and to say that it's a problem is maybe misleading, because the whole other side of this is that there's no good or bad. Things just are.
Yeah, just like
And
our last episode where we really
right.
dove deep into that.
Yeah, and that it's wild. Like I know that we wanted to set this topic moving forward, but like from in relation to our last episode, but to see it like play out this way is just absolutely just insane to me. Like it's just so cool how, you know, w- just to see that the way it comes up in life in the, I can't wait to see what our next topic is going to be based
Yeah.
off this week. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. Me too. And that was another thing I actually wanted to touch on is, from our last episode and how it can help set yourself up for success when you stop labeling things as good or bad and just appreciate the experience and the fact that you get to experience it and you come in with that sense of gratitude. That's I think the best way to set yourself up for success, because you're not in a clouded mindset and you're not looking for the negative things or the positive things, but you're able to reflect on the situation as a whole and see what little things you could, like you said earlier, course correct and keep pushing yourself along to that goal that you're trying to achieve without worrying about if you're going to achieve it or not, or what you haven't achieved, or
Yeah.
the flip side, your ego. You're boosting yourself, like you're inflating your ego. You're like, oh, I did all this, I did this, I did this, and I'm the baddest motherfucker out there, and that's also not healthy. Even though most people would prefer to do that than to be sad and be like, oh, I'm not killing it. But it's balance, man, balance.
And so that kind of, just the word that I pull out of that is humble, and just remaining humble in that way. But you know, I guess the next thing that comes to mind is, you know, there comes a time when you have to face the fact that we live in a society where you need to work and earn a living,
Yeah,
and and what you kind of said was the thing that I look at is like, you know, yes, I need to take responsibility for myself, and that should be one of the things that kind of guides me forward. But if I'm doing that and I'm doing it honestly, then you know these goals kind of start to take form by themselves, right? I do need money, but my ego tells me that I need the best job, right? Like I need to go make $1
yeah,
million this year, and maybe that's not the case, right? Like maybe that's gonna hurt you in some ways that you don't see, and that's not the necessarily way to approach it, but that's just a possible scenario that could happen. But what I pull out of that is you know addressing, being able to address the fact that in this scenario that you know to survive in society and not live in poverty, and not even that, right? Not even, I don't even want to say poverty, to feel like you're a successful person, like for me means that I am responsible for myself, and to do that is one of the ways that gives me that sense of accomplishment, of being responsible for myself, is just being a responsible person. and
mhm,
and I guess the reason I use work and money in that essence is because I think everybody can directly relate to the fact that at some point or another, mom and dad are kicking you out, and it's time to get a job.
yeah. And you know what that actually really just kind of brought to mind, like you using that money as an example. Like people want to get $1 million, and what came to mind was intentions and desires. And when you're
Mm,
setting a goal, you want to be really mindful of what you're doing and why you're setting it. right? Because I, desires is going to need its own episode, but I'll touch on it a little bit. When we have a desire to do something, it's because there's some sort of gap that we're trying to fill. And so I feel it's really healthy to set your intentions so that way you have a path that you're going on, you have a goal that you're working towards. But when you have a strong desire that's not being fulfilled right away, because you're not going to have $1 million right away, right? It's a goal you have to work towards. But when the desire is so strong and you're trying to fulfill this gap in you of not having $1 million and the negative side effects of that, you're broke and you got bills to pay and life's just going to shit because you don't have enough money. But what happens is you start to develop an unhealthy relationship with it, and
Mm.
you start to find ways to cheat your goal. You find ways to, like, for example, with money. And I can relate to this because I used to be a sales manager at the gym that I worked at. And one thing that they really taught us was to have healthy intentions and not to manipulate people, but to have a positive influence on them. And like sometimes, because I desired to help people, but I also desired to have food on my table and to support my daughter and everything, what that desire was causing was a lot of negative outcomes, because I was like, at times I would catch myself doing this and I'd have to course correct myself. And I'm not happy to admit this, but I would try and find ways to kind of get leverage on people to get them to buy a gym membership or to buy personal training or to buy supplements. And people can feel that, they can feel when you're not being authentic. They can obviously sense the manipulation. But because that desire was so strong, I was trying to cut corners. I was coming from a place of malice, and it didn't feel right. It felt horrible. And then I would, of course, in real time, as I noticed I was doing it, I would have to like try and take a step back and come from a place of compassion and love that I have for that person, and reminding myself that I just want to help them. And that's my desire. So being really careful about where that desire is stemming from and setting correct intentions is definitely something I feel like worth mentioning as
And
far as
I
goals go,
and
or
I
really
feel like,
anything.
yeah, absolutely. And I feel like I've been in a similar frame of mind, and what I ended up learning through this journey of development is that my mind will lie to myself, right? Like my brain
Yes.
will, yeah. And so I need to, you know, basically reprogram myself and make myself, uh, evaluate how my brain is running in a sense, right? Like, and you talked about like the desire, right? Like I am sure that I didn't know you when that was going on, but I am
Mhm.
sure that you know the way I relate to that is when I'm in a position like that and I am being driven by desire, that's not the active thought in my head, right? And
Mhm.
that's what I mean when I say the brain lies to the body and to yourself, because it'll take that desire and it'll pump it through its mechanism, that whatever it is that the brain does, and it'll turn that into being presented like it's in a good way, like you're helping these people, you know and that's where they can kind of see that lack of authenticity you were talking about. um and that oftentimes when I was in that space I couldn't see in myself.
Yeah. And what I want to add to that actually is, like, what's happening is when you're like lying to yourself, it's your ego. It's trying to rationalize with itself. It's trying to justify why what you're doing is okay. And that's a problem I see with so many salesmen, is they get themselves to truly believe that what they're doing is good, and it's all stemming from their ego, and they justify it, and they even try to get other people to believe it so that way they can help themselves believe it even more. I just think that's crazy, and I know that from experience. you know and that
Yeah.
was definitely something the guys at the gym, my mentors there, were some of the best role models I had for salesmen, because they actively did things to correct that behavior so that way we could be genuinely good people while doing sales.
It's so amazing how that works because one of the things that I see other people do is, you know, it's their approach to teaching lessons like that, and it's really interesting because it's almost like what I've seen in myself is that I have to go through things in an order, right? Like um, this better version that I feel like I'm becoming through my self development journey that has really taken some steps forward recently. You know that there's absolutely no way that could have happened from where it was to now without having gone through the progression and the order and the way that it went through. And so for you know people that are educators, essentially, I have a lot of respect for the ones that do it well. And the thing that I mean when I say well is I don't know this for sure, but I would imagine that these, whether it's, like a mentor or an educator or, maybe a therapist or, whatever, maybe a psychiatrist, those kind of like very where you get to know people on a level, right? They, I feel like to be good at that would be to, you know, see where they are and you know understand that their potential as a person is essentially unlimited, and to just recognize that to get from there to infinity would be you know not the same for everybody, and so that you have to like be able to recognize that for the person, and whatever advice or way that you go about helping them is like in relation to where they have been and where they are, and then where their kind of development as a person needs to go forward. And we've kind of talked about this before. It's such a tricky thing because you have to like take yourself out of it to be able to do that, I think. And it I just have a lot of respect for people that are able to do that well.
Oh yeah, me too for sure. So with that, is there anything else you feel like you'd like to add or unpack with the topic for today's discussion, setting ourselves up for success?
Mm, well, I did actually write down some goals for myself, and I suppose I can go ahead and read those. Um, so because I kind of caught myself, you know, unpacking the topic in this way, and then I thought, what are some goals that I should set now moving forward versus goals I had in the past. And I noticed that my goals are not about things now. My goals are, I'll just read them. So this is a thing that I wrote in my notes called my goals. Um, Live in harmony with the resonance of the universe every single moment, to stay focused, to improve, to live in my body and not just in my head, to laugh. I don't need to become anything to reach these goals. I laugh all the time. I'm always in my body. I'm not always focused. Balancing these things doesn't take any energy. Balancing these things is what gives you energy. When you see someone you know and they are firing on all cylinders, that means something. We aren't always in these states of balance, and that's okay. To attend to one of them simply is not going to work. I like to think way too much. There are times for thinking and doing. There is never a time for thinking about doing. When something resonates with me, I should savor that experience, be thankful I was present to receive that energy, and get back to experiencing. And then I also put have firm handshakes when I meet people, represent myself.
Oh yeah, I love everything in that list, man. That was so beautiful, and I'm so excited for you and everything that's gonna come for you in this coming week. And I'm really grateful to have you in my life, and I'm grateful that we're doing this together. And I'm
Yeah,
grateful
man.
that you're able to grow as much as you have been, and I'm grateful that I've been able to grow as much as I have.
And there's kind of a term that I have heard before, but in this kind of space, really, I think has a lot more power behind it. You know, just get 1% better every day, right? Um,
Yeah,
that doesn't mean that you're going to get 100%. That means you're going to get 1% better every day. And if you do that for 30 days, dude, like,
30% better.
man,
Yeah,
if you do that, it's incredible.
when I was working that sales job, actually the top of my binder, my sales binder, I had it written down 1% better every day. So every time I saw it, I was like, okay, I push myself right now because I know yesterday I didn't push myself. So I'm gonna push myself at least a little bit, maybe one more phone call or stay an extra 5 minutes and maybe make 5 more phone calls, something to progress. So definitely love that 1% better every day.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, all right, man. Well, I think a good topic for next week would be on desires. I feel like that's definitely one I want to dive into.
Yeah, I think that really plays into, we're going through a kind of like an order here, and I think
Yeah,
that's a good way to go. So let's do it.
awesome. Yeah, so desires and how to manage them so they don't get in
Mm,
your way. I feel like that's perfect.
I can't wait.
Yeah, it's gonna be fun, man. And of course, we always invite everyone or anyone listening, if they struggle with their desires taking too much of an influence on their day-to-day life, recognize some of these desires you have through the past week, and then maybe when me and Sean talk about it next week, you're able to take some of that insight and be able to dissect that a little bit yourself, and hopefully you'll see some fruit with that.
And if you'd like to, kind of document your journey through us as we go, we do have that Reddit subreddit that we post every week, the topic and the upcoming topic. So that's reddit.com/r/being now.
All right. Well, as always, Sean, it was amazing talking to you, and see you next week.
Always.